A few days ago, life felt normal, busy with work and family. Laura and I had our ups and downs, but it never felt unmanageable. We'd built a life together, full of good memories, but I couldn't ignore this growing sense of unease. I chalked it up to stress, but something was off. The tension between us kept rising, with small disagreements turning into big fights. Laura became distant and unpredictable, and every time I tried to talk about it, she shut me down. I knew something was wrong, but I never imagined it would get this bad. Sitting on the bedroom floor, overwhelmed and exhausted, I couldn't believe how far things had fallen. Just days ago, I would have never imagined this would be my life. The carpet that once felt like a symbol of our home now seemed ruined, a reminder of everything slipping away. I closed my eyes, muttering, "What the hell am I doing? I'm better than this." When I opened them, I saw the bed in front of me, and for a split second, I imagined Laura there. But I knew it was a fantasy that would never come true. Everything felt out of control. My hands shook as I tried to steady myself. The world around me seemed to blur, but I couldn't ignore the half-empty booze bottle and the pill bottle on the bed. I hadn't even capped the liquor bottle. The smell filled the room, making me sick. My eyes fell on the letters I'd written, sitting safely on the bedside table, not the mattress where they could be ruined. What if someone finds them? The thought crossed my mind briefly, but I quickly pushed it away. I wouldn't be around to worry about it. The bitterness in my stomach grew as I thought about how everything had fallen apart. My daughter would hate me for this. If she didn't already, after what happened last week, she probably did. "I can't take this anymore," I whispered, the pain in my chest suffocating me. Even as I felt my life slipping away, the pain wouldn't leave. A week ago, I would have fought to survive, but now I just felt broken, unwanted, and despised. There didn't seem to be any other way out. The pain in my wrists had faded, and I slipped into a numb, hazy sleep. I expected something, maybe a flash of my life or some light, but nothing came. The only thing I knew for sure was that I wanted to survive. But by then, it was already too late. A week ago, everything felt different. I was laughing with Emily, spinning her around in our home in Perth, Australia. She was 19, and her boyfriend Daniel had just proposed. "Dad, he proposed," she'd said, her face glowing with happiness. I had already known it was coming and had given my blessing. Emily and Daniel had been together since middle school, and I couldn't have been happier for her. Emily told us all about the proposal, how Daniel had sent me on a treasure hunt around town, eventually proposing under a tree in Kings Park. Her excitement was contagious. I hugged her and spun her around, thrilled for her and Daniel. The next day in the kitchen, I reassured her, "Even though you're young, your love is strong." I admired the ring on her hand. "It's beautiful, Emily," I said, smiling. "You did a great job picking it out," I added, nodding at Daniel. Laura, sitting nearby, raised her wine glass. "You should thank me. I helped Daniel choose it." Emily's face flushed. "Mom, that was inappropriate," she said, clearly uncomfortable. Laura shrugged it off. "It's okay, sweetie," she replied, dismissing the tension. I felt a chill from Laura's comment, but I didn't say anything. Over the past few months, Laura had been acting strangely. Little things, offhand comments, and behaviors that didn't feel like the woman I married. Still, we went on, celebrating Emily's engagement. After dessert, Emily and Daniel left for their apartment, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right with Laura. The next morning, Laura and I woke up slowly, but when things were about to get intimate, she suddenly pulled away and walked off to the bathroom. I was left stunned. "Laura?" I called after her. "What's the matter?" "From the bathroom," she replied. "Is there anything for me?" A minute later, she added, "I'm already getting cleaned up." Confused, I took a shower, and when I came out, I found a note on the kitchen counter. Laura was leaving for the day. Anger flared inside me. Laura had never been this disrespectful before. I started to wonder, is she cheating on me? The thought gnawed at me. Just then, my friend Victor called. "Hey, Ethan, what's up?" he asked. "Nothing much," I said, trying to hide the unease in my voice. Victor immediately sensed something was off. "Something's wrong," he said. I spent the next 10 minutes telling Victor about Laura's strange behavior. Victor laughed. If she's cheating, there's not much you can do. Divorce is 50-50, and she'll take you to the cleaners. His harsh realism only made my frustration grow. That's not helping, I snapped. I'm just being realistic, Victor said. Let's talk tomorrow at work. We've got that report on the Bennett project. I agreed without much enthusiasm. Victor and I worked together. I was the senior engineer, and he was the program manager. We balanced each other out well. Somehow, I managed to get through Sunday. Laura came home late, around midnight, and didn't say a word, even though she knew I was awake. The next morning, she acted as if nothing had happened. It's not going to happen, Laura, I said, getting out of bed. Are you saying no? She asked, surprised. I started dressing for work. After your disrespect last weekend, I can't. I trailed off, unsure how to finish. She sneered. What are you going to do, Ethan? There's nothing you can do. Her tone softened, but still carried mockery. Come on, just go back to bed. We both need this. I shook my head. Who are you? You can't treat me like this. The contempt you're showing is unbelievable. Well, screw you, she snapped, venom in her voice. For the first time in 21 years of marriage, I felt disgusted by my wife. At the office that morning, I was clearly stressed. My assistant, Nina, noticed immediately. Ethan, are you okay? You seem off, she said, concern in her voice. Nina had been with me for 10 years. When she was hired, she just left an abusive relationship, showing up to her interview with a black eye. Despite everything, she was brilliant, smart, capable, and strong. I trusted her completely. I hesitated but eventually told Nina about Laura. Her frown deepened as I spoke, and by the end, she was clearly angry for me. I don't know what to do, Nina, I said, feeling defeated. If she's cheating on me, I didn't see it coming. Nina, who rarely showed physical affection, placed a hand on my shoulder. First, let's get through the Bennett meeting. There are some issues with the pipes and concrete, she said, refocusing on work. What? Why didn't Victor mention this? I asked, already thinking ahead. Before we could discuss it further, Victor popped into my office, his usual upbeat self. You ready, buddy? He asked, smiling. Victor, what's this about problems with the pipes and concrete? I asked quietly. He waved it off. Don't worry, we'll sort it out. The meeting with the Bennett owners was a disaster. Usually friendly, they were now visibly upset. As I gave my progress report, their faces grew darker. Henry, the CEO, asked, What about the concrete and pipe overruns in the Northeast? I looked to Victor, but he just shrugged. Everyone stared at me. I'll need to check, I said. Last week's figures showed everything was on track. Henry's frown deepened. Then why have I signed off on over $200,000 in extra costs for concrete and pipes in the last 3 months? I was stunned. I looked to Victor again, but his face was unreadable. He suggested we step outside to figure things out. In another room, we met with our boss, Oscar. Before I could explain, Victor handed him a folder. They started asking about the missing materials. We expected this, Victor said, looking at me. Oscar turned to me, his eyes filled with fury. What are you saying, Ethan? He hissed. Sir, I've been informed everything was on track, I stammered. I didn't approve any extra costs. Oscar opened the folder and glared at me. So this is the story you're sticking to? Victor spoke up. We have requisitions for $206,000. The payments went to a bank account in your name. Oscar almost yelled. After all these years, this is how you repay me. I felt the situation spiraling out of control. The meeting ended with Oscar and Victor accusing me of fraud, refusing to believe I was innocent. They called HR, and I was fired on the spot. Oscar threatened to involve the police. Worse still, Nina was fired too, just because of her association with me. As I was escorted out with my things, I caught Victor smirking, thinking I wouldn't notice. Outside, I found Nina standing by her car, crying. Nina, are you okay? I asked. She spun around, furious. You prick, Ethan. You committed $200,000 in fraud and ruined my job. I trusted you. It wasn't me, I tried to explain. She cut me off. I saw the signed papers with your signature. How could you? And that story about Laura cheating, was that a lie too? You've destroyed my career. For the first time, I saw pure anger from Nina. She slapped me hard, calling me a liar and a thief, then drove off. Stunned, I drove home, where Laura was waiting. She sneered at me. The cheating husband returns. Pathetic. In the days that followed, Laura seemed almost pleased about everything. Confused, I confronted her. What's going on, Laura? I didn't do any of this. Laura grinned. It doesn't matter, Ethan. I'm done with you. A little later, there was a knock at the door. A man handed me a thick envelope. You've been served, he said before leaving. Divorce papers. Laura, a divorce? I whispered, my heart sinking. She laughed. Of course. I've been seeing someone else for months. He's everything you're not. Interesting. With money. You've lost your job, your family, and soon your freedom, she said, leaning closer. Make it easy for me. Sign the papers. I'm taking the house, most of the property. You'll be in jail soon anyway. Are you staying with your lover? I asked, feeling utterly betrayed. Yes, she replied. And once you're in jail, we'll rent the house. Don't even think about stalking me, or I'll have you arrested. I sat down, overwhelmed by everything. Laura noticed the handprint Nina had left on my face and smiled cruelly. At least that strumpet got fired too, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Go die in a hole, Ethan. With that, she was gone. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, barely able to move, let alone think. I didn't even reach for a drink. The next morning, still numb, I tried calling Emily. After what felt like an eternity, she finally picked up. What is it? Her voice was ice cold. Emily, I started, but she interrupted. Don't bother, Dad. Mom told me everything. About your cheating, your lies, the affair with your assistant. You've ruined everything. I've never been more disappointed in you. I was stunned into silence. As I opened my mouth to respond, she cut me off again. Daniel, and I want nothing to do with you. You're on the news. The police are after you. Don't come to our wedding. I don't want you walking me down the aisle. Tears flooded my eyes, but I couldn't speak. You messed up so badly, Dad. Are you even listening to yourself? She asked, her voice cracking. But all I could do was sob. Goodbye, Dad. You're dead to me. Don't ever contact me again, she said, before hanging up. The line went dead, and I collapsed, broken. 2 days later, the police arrested me, dragging me in for questioning about the fraud. They let me go, but warned me not to leave town. The weight of everything hit me as I walked back to my empty house. My wife gone, my daughter cutting me out of her life, my career in ruins, and Nina blaming me. Even my so-called friends turned their backs. I was alone, utterly alone, a failure. As an engineer, I was used to problem solving, but this felt like an impossible puzzle. I dragged myself through the day, forcing down a sandwich that tasted like ash in my mouth. The hardest blow was Emily. She'd erased me from her life without a second thought. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the bottle of sleeping pills and booze. The thought crossed my mind, dark and suffocating, but I shoved it away. I couldn't let it consume me. Not yet. The next morning, I received a restraining order, barring me from Laura, Emily, Daniel, and even Victor. It was clear they wanted me gone. I could barely wrap my head around it, especially the fact that Victor was named. Something didn't feel right. Anger flared. I texted him, "You're responsible for this. I'll find you and destroy you." No reply. But soon after, detectives showed up, accusing me of violating the restraining order. They didn't care to listen. They just wanted to lock me up. They told me to stay put while they monitored me packing my things. Frustrated and consumed by rage, I poured myself 3 shots of whiskey. Then I sat down and wrote letters. To Laura, Emily, and Nina. To Laura, I wrote, "You're a traitorous piece of shit. I hope you rot in hell for what you've done to me." I sealed it, spitting on the envelope in disgust. To Emily, I wrote, "You never even asked if I was guilty. I didn't cheat on your mother. She cheated on me. I didn't steal any money. It was all lies. I hope you'll see through them eventually." I begged her not to let Victor walk her down the aisle. Tears soaked the paper as I sealed it. To Nina, I began with an apology. This isn't your fault. I believe Victor betrayed us both. He's the one behind all of this. I explained how I had always admired her, never meant to make her uncomfortable. I asked for forgiveness and hoped she could find it in her heart to understand. After sealing the letters, I left a note for the detectives. Look into Victor's finances. He's the one who did this. Do your job before another innocent man gets ruined. Then I grabbed the booze, the pills, and headed to the bedroom. I took a long, hot shower, sipped more whiskey, and swallowed the pills. I dressed carefully, as though it mattered, before collapsing on the floor near the bathroom, holding a straight razor. In that moment, everything felt like too much. My life ruined, my worth gone. But then something shifted. I remembered the small flicker of hope deep down. Maybe there was still a way out. As I lay there, barely conscious, Detective James Whitaker showed up. A concerned neighbor had alerted him, and he was monitoring the situation. When he found me, I was in critical condition. An ambulance arrived, and soon the house was a crime scene. They discovered hidden cameras, 3 of them, that I had no idea about. They found the booze, the pills, and the letters. I was out cold for 3 days. When I woke up, I was in a private hospital in Hollywood. A nurse pointed to Nina, who had stayed with me despite everything. She was sitting quietly by my side. Seeing her, I whispered her name, and she immediately took my hand. "Ethan, what were you thinking?" she asked softly, her voice breaking despite her best effort to stay strong. Tears filled her eyes. "I thought it would be better this way," I confessed, shame overwhelming me. She snorted, her face softening with both concern and disbelief. "I wish you'd thought it through," she whispered, holding my hand tighter. "You think ending your life is the answer?" Nina's voice was steady, but there was a rawness beneath it as she sat beside me. The hum of hospital machines filled the silence. "I've known you for over a decade, Ethan. I've never seen you give up so easily. What were you thinking?" I stared at the ceiling, exhausted, trying to find the words. Finally, I spoke. "Nina, I'm so sorry," I whispered. "When Laura, you, and Emily turned on me, I felt trapped. No one asked if I was guilty. I was just condemned. My wife told me to die. Emily disowned me. My friend betrayed me, and I hurt you. I wasn't thinking straight. I got drunk and did what seemed like the only option." She nodded slowly, her eyes filling with unshed tears. She sat gently on the edge of my bed. "I'm sorry too, Ethan," she said softly. "I was angry, and I didn't consider that you might be innocent. I was wrong." I closed my eyes, too tired to speak. "It's okay, Nina," I murmured. "No, it's not," she replied, her voice cracking. "The fact that you're here, thinking I'm part of what drove you to this. I don't know if I can forgive myself." "It's okay," I repeated, squeezing her hand, the weight of everything settling in. We sat like that, in silence, for what felt like hours. Finally, a doctor entered the room, glancing at my chart. "Well, Mr. Other, good to see you awake. How are you feeling?" he asked with a slight smile. "Alive. Didn't expect to be," I replied, my voice hollow. The doctor frowned at my tone, but Nina's grip on my hand tightened. "Let's work on keeping you that way," he said, checking my stitches and vitals. He mentioned a detective wanted to speak with me. Once the doctor left, I turned to Nina. "Are you here because of my letter?" I asked, still feeling the weight of what I'd written. "No, I haven't seen it," she answered, shaking her head. "Detective Whitaker told me about it. My cousin works here, and she called me when you were admitted. After your self-destructive attempt." Her voice trembled, and I couldn't look at her, guilt eating at me. "I was still angry when I left," Nina continued. "But deep down, I knew you couldn't have done what they accused you of. I've worked with you for years. When I heard what happened, I realized you'd been set up. I'm so sorry, Ethan." She broke down, sobbing, her head resting against my chest. I held her as best as I could, feeling the weight of her grief. She stood up a few minutes later, wiping her eyes. As she tried to pull her hand away, I kept holding on. "I thought about it more," Nina said, her voice stronger now. "It didn't make sense. You loved your job. But when Victor showed me those documents, I was so angry. Wait, Victor, I interrupted, my heart racing. He set me up, didn't he? Nina nodded. I think so. I can't prove it, but something's off. He didn't warn us about the overspending, and those signed documents, those weren't yours. I also think he's involved with Laura. I closed my eyes, holding her hand. I'm sorry, Nina. I never thought Victor and Laura would drag you into this, but I can't prove my innocence. That's why I did what I did. Before she could respond, another voice entered the room. You're right. You can't prove it. They did a good job framing you. A tall, fit man entered the room with a quiet confidence. Mr. Other, I'm Detective James Whitaker. I, along with your neighbor, Mrs. Carter, found you. I'm glad to see you're feeling better. I shrugged, trying to keep the bitterness in check. Thanks, but I'm sure you'll be arresting me once I'm released. Detective Whitaker paused, glancing at Nina before answering. About that, he said, running a hand through his hair. I've been assigned to your case, and some things don't add up. Would you be willing to be interviewed again? I nodded, my resolve returning. I've got nothing left to lose. Nina frowned. What about a lawyer? Shouldn't he have one? The detective sighed, nodding. Yes, he should. And it's a good idea. Nina left the room, making the call. Whitaker watched her go before turning back to me. She cares about you a lot, Mr. Other, he said. You need people on your side right now. I couldn't help but remind him, I'm the one you're investigating. He smiled slightly. True, but I think there's more to this case than meets the eye. You do believe you're innocent, don't you? Absolutely, I said, showing him the bandages on my wrists. I would never steal from a company I loved working for. Just then, Nina returned. My cousin, Morgan Hart, will be representing Ethan, she said, a sense of calm in her voice. The detective nodded. I know Morgan. She's a good lawyer. Have her contact me as soon as possible. After a few more minutes of conversation, Whitaker left. That was unusual, I remarked once he was gone. Yeah, Nina agreed. Cops aren't usually this friendly. We sat in silence for a while before I asked, Who's looking after Chloe? My mom's got her, Nina said, handing me a drawing from Chloe, a hospital scene with a get-well-soon message. I blinked back tears. Thank you, I said hoarsely. Have you heard from Emily? I asked, my heart heavy. Nina shook her head. I've tried calling, but no response. We sat quietly until Morgan arrived. After introductions, Nina stepped out, leaving me alone with my new lawyer. Morgan, like Nina, was attractive with sandy brown hair, and it was easy to see they were related. She flashed me a half-smile. She likes you, you know, she said, echoing Detective Whitaker's earlier words. I snorted. We've worked together for years. Morgan raised an eyebrow. Men can be clueless. I laughed without humor. I think my ex-wife proves that. Morgan gave me a sad smile. Don't worry. I've spoken with Detective Whitaker. He seems to be on your side. I have some theories about what's going on, and I'll handle your case. Your only crime was trusting the wrong people. I nodded, the anger still simmering. I want as much as I can get from the divorce. Morgan's expression softened. I understand. Laura and Victor set you up, possibly stole from the firm, and left you to take the fall. You have every right to go after them with everything you've got. Don't hold back. I liked Morgan. She spent time with me, listening to the details of the events leading up to my suicide attempt, reassured me that things would get better, and promised to contact me once I was released for a formal police interview. The next few days dragged on. I stayed in the hospital, with doctors and nurses checking on me regularly. Without my phone, I couldn't contact anyone, and honestly, I doubted anyone wanted to hear from me anyway. But Nina visited the next day, bringing a paperback, Endymion by Dan Simmons, which made me laugh. It was a book I had enjoyed years ago. As Nina sat beside me, reading her Pride and Prejudice, she smiled and said, I'm here to look after you. We chatted, and at lunch, she brought me roast beef with chips and a chicken wrap for herself. Despite the pain in my wrists, I felt a small spark of normalcy. Later, Nina returned as the doctors removed my four and told me I'd be discharged the next morning if my blood tests came back clear. I looked at her, uncertainty in my eyes. I don't know where to go. I don't have my phone or wallet to get a hotel, and I can't go home. Nina smiled warmly. Morgan got a court order to access your belongings. I brought your phone, wallet, clothes, laptop, iPad, and shaving supplies. I was stunned by her kindness. Thank you. Now I can at least find a hotel. But I noticed her expression shift, a shadow crossing her face. What's wrong? I asked. She hesitated before speaking. You were right about Victor and Laura, she said quietly. When Morgan, the officer, and I went to get your things, they were living together. They weren't expecting visitors. I sighed, feeling a twinge of guilt. I'm sorry you had to see that. Nina smiled slightly. They yelled at me to leave until the officer warned them they'd be arrested for violating a court order. Then I got your things. Tears welled up in her eyes as she recalled the scene. There was blood on the carpet, she whispered. Don't ever do that again. I promise, I said, my voice thick, holding up my bandaged hands. The next morning, I was discharged. Nina met me, and we walked to her car. She drove me to a condo complex in Kings Park. Nina, why are we here? Can I stay here? I asked. Of course you can, she smiled. You don't need to spend money on a hotel. Stay in my guest room for a few days. Morgan's meeting us this afternoon to discuss your case. I'd been to Nina's house before. It was a cozy 2-story home she shared with her daughter, Chloe. After settling in, Morgan arrived, bringing legal documents and a serious expression. Ethan, you're a very lucky man, she said, as she sat down and laid the papers on the coffee table. She explained that Victor and Laura had almost gotten away with everything, but their plan had started to unravel. My accounts had been frozen, including one they'd fraudulently opened in my name. Morgan had obtained video footage of them opening the account, and she was pursuing legal action for fraud and mental cruelty. They would face consequences soon, she assured me. She also informed us that she had initiated legal proceedings against my former employer for unfair dismissal. Morgan expected everything to be resolved by the end of the week, and she had already arranged a formal interview with Detective Whitaker for the next day. She advised me to follow her instructions closely. I believe Laura and Victor will be arrested soon, Morgan said confidently. Over the next hour, we discussed the details, signed legal documents, and I felt a flicker of hope, something I hadn't felt in a long time. When Morgan left, I unpacked my clothes and toiletries. Nina and I spent the afternoon talking about what might happen next. When Nina left to pick up Chloe from school, I turned on my phone for the first time in days. I had a few missed calls and texts, mostly from Laura, taunting me to sign the divorce papers before I ended up in jail. Oddly, there were several missed calls from my former job, asking me to get in touch. But there was nothing from Emily. When Nina and Chloe returned, Chloe eagerly shared stories about her day, full of energy and excitement. I enjoyed spending time with her, helping with her homework and reading together. She reminded me so much of Nina, and her innocent joy was a welcome relief from the weight of my worries. We had dinner and watched TV together before bedtime. Chloe asked me to put her to bed, and as I tucked her in, she gave me a hug that almost brought tears to my eyes. Her affection felt so genuine, so untainted by the world. It was a stark contrast to the painful rejection from Emily. Afterward, Nina and I sat on the couch talking. She held my hand, and as she hugged me, she assured me that everything would be okay. The next day, after the interview with Detective Whitaker and Morgan, all charges against me were dropped. That evening, the news reported that Laura and Victor had warrants out for their arrest on charges of fraud and identity theft, but they had vanished. Later that evening, Emily called for the first time, but I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to talk to her. The following day, Emily called and texted repeatedly, urging me to reach out. But I didn't. Her sudden concern felt insincere, like it was driven by the fallout from her mother and Victor's actions. I was angry that she had abandoned me so easily and only now wanted to reach out. That night, I had a nightmare about the night I hurt myself. In the dream, Laura and Victor mocked me, and Nina, Emily, and Daniel joined in, leaving me to die. I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. Nina rushed to my side, Chloe standing in the doorway, her face streaked with tears. I buried my head in my hands, sobbing. "I'm sorry, I can't do this," I said, trying to catch my breath. Nina climbed into bed with me, and Chloe followed, squeezing in beside me. Chloe hugged my arm, her small voice full of warmth. "It's all right, Uncle Ethan. You just had a bad dream. Mom and I will stay with you." I couldn't sleep after that. Chloe eventually drifted off beside me, her hand resting lightly on my stomach, while Nina kept her eyes on me with concern. "Are you okay, Ethan?" she asked gently, pulling me closer. I thought for a moment before answering. "No, I'm not okay. It was a dream about that night." I couldn't finish the sentence, but Nina didn't need me to. She kissed my cheek softly, nuzzling into my neck. "What are we going to do, Ethan?" she whispered, her voice thick with pain. I hugged her and Chloe close, trying to calm my own racing thoughts. "We'll figure it out. It'll be okay," I said, my voice shaky but determined. In that moment, Nina's concern made me feel more like myself than I had since that terrible night. I held them both until the sun began to rise, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. The next morning, after breakfast, Nina took Chloe to school while I started searching for a counselor. I knew I needed help. By the time Nina returned, I had already made several calls. She smiled at me, but her expression quickly turned serious. "Ethan, can we talk?" she asked, leading me to the couch. I nodded, bracing myself. "It's okay, Nina," I said softly. "I realized last night was scary, especially with Chloe here. It's not good if I'm waking up screaming. I'll find somewhere else to stay." Nina's eyes widened in panic, and she quickly grabbed my hands. "No, Ethan, that's not what I wanted to talk about. It's actually the opposite," she said, taking a deep breath. "Ethan Lay, I'm in love with you." I froze, stunned. "Excuse me?" "I'm in love with you," she repeated, her voice softer now, tinged with a blush. She looked into my eyes, searching for my reaction. "I've been in love with you for a long time," she added, her words tumbling out. "When I heard you were in the hospital, I went crazy with worry. I couldn't stand the thought of losing you without telling you how I felt." I was speechless as she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I tried to keep it to myself, but seeing you hurt last night broke my heart. I had to tell you. Haven't you noticed I don't go on dates?" "Yes," I answered, still trying to process. "But I always assumed it was because of Chloe." "That's partly true," she admitted. "But it's also because no one else measures up to you." She explained how she had admired me from the moment we started working together. I'd treated her with respect, helped her, and made Chloe feel special. "You've been like a father figure to her," Nina said. "When everything fell apart last week, you handled it with grace. You didn't lash out, even when I did." She blushed, recalling how she had slapped me. "You're an amazing man, Ethan. I love you for so many reasons. If Laura was foolish enough to throw you away, I'm here to pick you up." She kissed me, and time seemed to stop. The kiss was gentle, but it was full of something deeper, something I wasn't sure I was ready for. "Will you take me, Ethan? Will you make me your woman?" Nina asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I was stunned. I had fantasized about Nina before, but this was real, happening so fast. I knew things with Laura were over, but Nina's love made me feel less like a failure. Still, a part of me feared it might backfire. She seemed to sense my hesitation but said nothing. She simply took my hand and led me to her bedroom. Afterward, we fell asleep, but the dreams didn't stop. This time, Laura and Victor tormented me again, but Nina appeared, healing my wounds. She flew away, leaving the scene of anxiety and sorrow behind. We woke to the sound of the alarm, and I shuddered but didn't scream. As we dressed, I told Nina about the dream. She looked concerned but didn't say much. Later, she took me with her when she went to pick up Chloe from school. The weight of the last few days still pressed down on me, but I felt a new sense of strength in Nina's presence. A few weeks passed, and both Victor and Laura were arrested while trying to flee the country. They had panicked when they realized the charges against me had been dropped and tried to escape from Perth to Adelaide. Customs caught them trying to cross the border, and it took 2 months for them to be brought back to Perth. During that time, my relationship with Nina grew stronger. I moved into her bedroom, now our bedroom, and it felt like I was in my 20s again. I had clearly fallen in love with her. When Victor and Laura were finally brought back to Perth, I realized Nina had been right. I barely thought about Laura anymore. A month later, Nina, Morgan, and I testified in court against Laura and Victor. Victor avoided looking at me during the trial, and when the verdict came down, he was sentenced to 15 years. Laura, however, kept her eyes on me the entire time. The full extent of their betrayal was revealed. Victor had masterminded the scheme, seduced Laura, and orchestrated the fraud. Laura was sentenced to 20 years as an accessory, with an additional 5 years for mental cruelty, based on footage she had secretly recorded to help Victor frame me. After the verdict, the judge granted our divorce. Morgan made sure our savings were split, and the house was sold with proceeds divided. After some persuasion, I agreed to act as trustee for Laura's funds until her sentence was served. I wasn't allowed to access the money, but I could invest it for her. Victor and Laura were ordered to begin their sentences immediately. Laura's lawyer asked if I would meet with her before she was taken away. After a long hesitation, I agreed. Part of me still needed closure. In the interrogation room, Laura sat hunched over, avoiding my gaze. We sat in silence for a moment before she spoke softly. "I'm sorry, Ethan Lay. I didn't know what to say." "Are you really sorry?" I asked, my voice thick with bitterness. "After everything you did?" She looked at me, tears in her eyes. "Yes, Ethan. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened to me." I felt the anger rise but tried to stay calm. "You had everything, me, my trust, and you still chose him." She nodded slowly, her face crumpled with guilt. "At first, I didn't want to, but Victor knew how to manipulate me. He played on my insecurities. I was weak, and then the affair, it spiraled. I felt lost, and Victor promised me everything would be okay." "You didn't care that you were destroying me," I said, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "I didn't want to," she replied quietly, eyes brimming with regret. "But Victor made me believe it was the only way. He wanted to break you completely. He needed me to be all in." "Well, you almost succeeded," I said, my voice hard. "If it wasn't for Detective Whitaker and Nina, you might have gotten away with it." Laura looked down, wiping at her eyes. We sat in silence for a while before she spoke again. "Can I see them?" I knew what she meant. My hands, the ones that were scarred from that night. I placed them on the table in front of her. She stared at them for a moment, trembling, before reaching out with hesitation. She stopped just before touching them, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, Ethan," she said, her voice broken. "I can't undo this. You don't deserve this." I didn't know what to feel. A part of me still wanted to scream at her. Another part was filled with pity. Laura seemed to sense my inner turmoil. "I'm going to serve my time," she said quietly. "I deserve it. I'll never make it right, but I'm sorry." I nodded, still processing everything. "You'll pay for what you did, and I'll move on from this. It's over." Then she looked up at me, and for the first time, there was something vulnerable in her eyes. "Ethan, just so you know, you were never a bad lover. You were better than Victor. He was selfish. I should have seen what I had with you." I felt a pang of disbelief. "That's not what this is about," I said, shaking my head. "It wasn't about that." "I know," she replied, "but I wanted you to know. You were the better man." We fell into a long silence before she finally asked, "You and Nina?" I nodded. "Yeah, I think we're figuring things out." Laura's eyes softened. "Good. She's loved you for years, you know." I glanced at her, surprised. "I just found out recently." "She'll never betray you like I did," Laura said quietly. "She's everything I'm not." I didn't know how to respond to that. "I don't know what to say," I murmured, feeling the weight of her words. "I'll always be sorry, Ethan. I should have been honest. I'm sorry for everything I did to you." She wiped at my tears with the sleeve of her prison jumpsuit. "I'm trying to make things right, even if it's too late." "I saw the letter you wrote," I said, my voice cracking. "You're right. You'll pay for this. But I'm alive. And that's the only thing that matters now." Laura looked at me, her face full of shame. "I will carry this guilt, and I deserve it. But I'm glad you're still here." I couldn't think of a response. What more could I say? Instead, I changed the subject. I'm still going to manage your money, like we agreed. It'll give you something when you get out. Laura laughed bitterly. I'll be in my 60s by then. Who knows? Keep at it, I said, trying to lighten the moment. Maybe you'll make it to 80. We exchanged some brief words about our finances, and the awkwardness between us lessened slightly. But I could feel there was still more she wanted to say. Have you talked to Emily? She asked hesitantly. I shook my head, feeling the familiar ache. No. She accepted your lies without question. She cut me off, and it broke me. Laura's face softened with sympathy. I'm sorry, Ethan. You deserve better than that. I didn't know how to respond. The pain of losing Emily, of being thrown away by her without even a chance to explain, was still raw. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. Maybe it's for the best, I said quietly. Maybe I'm better off without her too. Laura didn't say anything. She just nodded, offering me a quiet understanding as she was led away. After Laura's call, I turned away to hide my tears. If I'd looked back, I would have seen her crying too. Nina had tried contacting Emily while I was in the hospital, but there was no response. I wiped my face and sat back down. Laura, too, sat quietly, her face a mask of shame. I'm sorry, Ethan, Laura said, wrinkling her nose in regret. Victor and I planned this. We even turned Emily against you. Anger surged in me, but I nodded, letting her continue. I know I ruined everything, Laura added, her voice small. And Emily has cut me off too. She's angry and scared, and I can't fix it. She feels guilty about how she treated you. It makes everything worse. Laura's eyes met mine, and she said, Ethan, I know I don't have the right to ask, but could you find it in you to forgive Emily? She needs at least one parent. Even if I wasn't in prison, the guilt of what I did would have destroyed me. I inhaled deeply, the weight of her words settling heavily on my chest. What you're asking is hard. You hurt me deeply. But when Emily told me I was dead to her, that hurt more than anything you did. I struggled to maintain my composure. I want to reconnect with her, but the pain of what you and she did, I don't know how to get past it. I get it, Laura whispered. Her face crumpled with sorrow. I'm trying to live with my choices too, but I'm asking you to take care of her. Please. I closed my eyes, fighting back the anger. I'm trying not to hate you, I said. I'm getting professional help, but it's hard not to yell at you. I paused, swallowing. I'll consider talking to Emily, but I can't promise anything. Laura stood up, looking older than her years. She looked at me, her face lined with regret. I know it means little now, but I'm sorry for everything. I have no excuses. I'll serve my time and hope that one day, you might forgive me. She glanced up, her eyes full of pain. I still love you, Ethan. I lost sight of that, but I always will. We stood there in silence, as tears streamed down Laura's face. She knocked on the door, and the guard came in to escort her out. She looked back at me one last time. Love Nina, Ethan. Give her the love I foolishly threw away. Live a beautiful life, and hold your head high. Remember, there are people who care about you. I'm proud of you, even if I lost my way. Goodbye, my beautiful man. As she walked away, I felt a heaviness in my chest. Laura had accepted responsibility for her actions, but it didn't make the pain of the past disappear. When I left the room, I saw a trail of tears on the floor where Laura had walked. I paused for a moment, mourning what had been, then turned and walked away. My spirits lifted when I saw Nina waiting for me in the public gallery, looking beautiful even on such a somber day. Did everything go well? She asked, her voice gentle. Yes, I replied, surprised by Laura's sincerity. She took most of the blame, and she seemed genuinely remorseful. What do you think? Nina asked. I still have a lot of anger toward Victor and Laura, I said, but unlike Victor, I feel some pity for her. She knows she ruined everything, and now she's paying for it. Nina nodded, then hesitated. Daniel and Emily are here. They're at the cafe across the street if you want to talk to them. Apparently, they had a big fight over how Emily treated you, but she's desperate to see you. I took a deep breath. You think I should talk to her, don't you? Nina nodded. Yes, my love. There's a pain in your soul that only Emily can heal. But I'll be with you, and if I need to, I'll defend you like a mama bear. I love you, Ethan. I love you too, Nina, I said, finally letting myself say the words out loud in public. I didn't care who saw. Nina was the only one who mattered. We walked hand in hand to the cafe. As we entered, we saw Emily and Daniel. Emily was caught between running away or hugging me, and before I knew it, she was in my arms, crying and saying, "I'm sorry, Daddy." I glanced at Nina, who smiled softly, and at Daniel, who looked unsure of what to do. After a few moments, I gently pulled Emily away, and we all sat down. "I just talked to your mom," I said quietly, my voice strained. Emily nodded, still crying. "I'm sorry, Dad. I held up a hand to stop her. "I know, Emily," I said, trying to steady myself. "Your mom explained a lot, but your words hurt me deeply. I felt abandoned by you, someone I thought would always care about me. What hurt the most was that you didn't even ask if I was innocent." Emily blushed with embarrassment. "Dad, No," I interrupted gently. "You need to hear this. I felt like you threw me away without giving me a chance to explain." Emily squared her shoulders. "I should have given you that chance. I didn't. I let Mom and Victor convince me you were guilty, that you were going to jail. I thought Nina was part of your scheme." She glanced at Nina, then back at me. "By the time I called you, I was so worked up that I said things I regret. Daniel and I fought about it. When Nina left messages about you being in the hospital, I thought it was a trick. They made it sound like you just wanted attention." She looked at me, her face full of regret. "But it's true, Dad. You were trying to." She couldn't finish the sentence, and none of us could. I took a deep breath and showed her my scars. "I'm sorry, Emily. I was at my lowest point, and I didn't see a way out. I got drunk and made a terrible mistake," I said slowly, my voice heavy with regret. It was difficult to speak, but I knew I had to show her the weight of my actions. Emily began sobbing, her hands trembling as she hid her face. Nina pulled me close, her presence grounding me as the raw emotion threatened to overwhelm us all. After a few moments of silence, Daniel spoke up, attempting to lighten the mood. "I know this is serious, but can I assume something good came out of all this?" he asked, gesturing toward Nina and me. Emily looked up, her eyes wide with realization. "Daddy, you and Nina?" she asked hesitantly. I nodded, feeling the urge to clarify. "It wasn't an affair, Emily. I never cheated. When I woke up in the hospital, Nina refused to leave me, even though she believed the lies your mother and Victor spread for a while. We worked through it. I realized just how much she loved me." Nina blushed, wrapping her arms around me and pressing a quick kiss to my cheek. Daniel smiled, and after a long moment, Emily found her composure. "Thank you," she said softly to Nina. "Thank you for being there for my dad." Nina laughed, easing the tension, and we spent the next few hours talking, sharing our experiences, and learning more about each other. At one point, Emily swapped seats with Nina to give me a hug. Though that meeting didn't heal everything, it was a start. It took months for Emily and me to rebuild our relationship. We attended counseling together to work through the trust issues and other challenges. One difficult session involved me asking Emily not to cut Laura out of her life entirely. Despite everything, Laura was still her mother, and she was paying the price for her actions. Emily agreed to visit Laura, but only if I went with her the first time. That meeting was tough, and we didn't speak much about it afterward. But Emily made an effort, and a week later, Laura sent me a letter thanking me for encouraging Emily to see her. 6 months later, when things had settled, I proposed to Nina during a family dinner. Chloe and Emily both thought it was long overdue. Daniel shook my hand, telling me to take care of Nina, repeating the words I had once said to him. Soon after, Emily and Daniel got married, with my full blessing. Nina visited Laura in jail and asked if she could step in as the mother of the bride. Laura, in tears, agreed. Chloe was the flower girl, proudly calling herself my second daughter. From that moment on, I was no longer Uncle Ethan, I was Dad. Walking Emily down the aisle, I felt the last remnants of our strained relationship vanish. Later, Emily sent Laura photos and a letter thanking her for allowing Nina to step in. I heard Laura keeps those on her cell wall. Meanwhile, The legal issues with Victor and Laura finally settled. Morgan negotiated a significant settlement for Nina and me. Oscar initially resisted, but just before the trial, he offered a deal that Morgan rejected as too low. Eventually, we secured a high six-figure sum for Nina and a seven-figure sum for me. Though the settlement wasn't huge compared to what a public trial might have cost Oscar, it forced him into an early retirement and the sale of his company at a steep loss. With the money, Nina and I started our own engineering consulting firm, offering both administrative and engineering services. Within 6 months, we had 5 employees working on major projects across the country. One of our first clients was Henry Bennett, who took us to dinner to apologize. He realized we had been wronged and admitted that the project would have failed without my engineering skills. Since then, we've been invited to all the major Bennett events, even if we weren't working on their projects. Henry was a good man who got caught in a bad situation and was eager to make amends. We sold Nina's small house and bought a much larger one with a stunning view of Kings Park. The old 5-bedroom, 3-bathroom house needed restoration, and we spent the next 2 years fixing it up, taking breaks only for family holidays, weddings, and the birth of Emily and Chloe's little brother, Noah. Life had improved, though I still had occasional nightmares. Nina, ever my rock, was always by my side. More than a decade later, Noah was 10, and Chloe was in university studying law like Aunt Morgan. One lazy Saturday, Emily and Daniel were visiting, sitting with us on the front terrace overlooking Kings Park. Noah was playing Xbox with my 7-year-old grandson, Logan, while my 5-year-old granddaughter, Sophia, tried to join in. It was then that Emily brought up her mother. "Dad, I got a letter from Mom this week," she said cautiously. Although Laura wasn't a taboo subject, we all tread lightly when it came to her. Over the years, I'd received several letters from Laura and even visited her a few times. I knew she was in treatment and was respected in prison, though she still had 8 years left on her sentence. "What did she say?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Among other things, she mentioned that Victor was released last month," Emily replied. I took a deep breath, feeling Nina's hand on mine. "Did she say anything else?" Nina asked, sensing my unease. Emily nodded. "Yeah, she said he came to see her. He didn't look well, and it wasn't a calm conversation." "I'll visit her next week to learn more," Emily added. We discussed it briefly, and then I called James Whitaker, now a close friend and head of the major crimes team. "Ethan, how are you? How's Nina?" He greeted me warmly. "Nina's great," I replied, "but I just found out Victor was released." James's tone shifted. "Yeah, I got the report yesterday. I was planning to tell you at bowling next week. He's moving to Adelaide, got a job, but he's already told his probation officer that he wishes you'd rot in hell for ruining his life." I exhaled slowly. "Has he caused any trouble?" James hesitated. "He's had a tough time, but I don't think he'll be much of a problem. I'm keeping an eye on him." "Thanks, James. That was my concern. Let me know if anything changes," I said. After we hung up, Nina looked at me. "James." I nodded. "He confirmed Victor is moving to Adelaide, but he still hates me. The feeling's mutual." The rest of the day was subdued, but my family made sure I felt supported. That night, I woke up screaming from my first nightmare in years. In it, Victor threatened my family, forcing me to use the razor again. Nina woke up instantly, trying to calm me down. Without hesitation, she called my therapist, who kindly took our call at 2 a.m. I explained the dream while Nina cried beside me. Talking about it helped, and my therapist suggested the nightmare was likely triggered by Victor's release and my lingering anxiety. We arranged a follow-up session. Afterward, Nina checked on Noah, who had stirred briefly before going back to sleep. I lay back down, and Nina snuggled close. "Do you think Victor will be a problem?" she asked, concern in her voice. "No," I replied. "I think he'll disappear, and we won't hear from him again. Even if we do, we're prepared." I hinted at the hunting gear safely stored away. Nina nodded, her eyes soft with worry. "I'm sorry this news upset you. Are you okay?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Sort of," I said. "There will always be a shadow from those days, but I focus on the good now. I'm grateful for you, the woman who saved my life." Nina looked at me seriously. "I love you, Ethan." "I love you too," I replied, my heart swelling. We fell asleep, and while life wasn't perfect, we had more good days than bad. There were still challenges, nightmares, and occasional fights, but I knew I had the unconditional love of the woman who made everything possible, friends who accepted me, and a family that supported me through life's storms.